Hello, and welcome to another session of Excel Programming for Clinicians with me, Dolotson Callum. In this session, I will introduce you to the power of branching in your program based on conditions. Now, this is a really foundational concept in programming, and I am very excited that you have stuck with me so far. We will look at the basic if-then statement. We will then expand this out to the if-then-else statement. And then we will contrast this with the immediate if statement. Next, we'll take a look at the power of nesting one if-then statement inside another. Next, we'll take a look at the if-then-else-if statement. After that, we'll have a look at the switch statement, and I will show you why I prefer to use it anytime I have more than 3 conditions to compare. Finally, we'll take a look at the importance of the order of your conditions as you go through an if-then or a switch case statement. Okay, so to explore branching in our Excel VBA programming code, we're going to use a scenario of getting platelet counts for our patients and trying to work out whether or not they are thrombocytopenic, i.e. whether or not the platelet counts are too low. So you will remember a normal platelet count is around 150 to 450. And as the platelet count drops to, say, below 100, we start to get concerned. And anything below that, we say the patient is thrombocytopenic. Let's explore this using Excel VBA programming. We will start with the basic if-then statement. Let's declare a variable to hold our platelet count. And let's declare a variable to hold the output. Before we start using these variables, let's initialize them by setting platelet count to 0 and the report to an empty string. Now we have a field here in Excel, cell C13, where we want our user to enter the platelet count. So let's get the platelet count. So whatever's currently in cell C13, we want to get the value property and put it into our platelet count variable. With that in place, we can start to test our if-then statement. We can say if platelet count is less than, say, 70, then report is equal to thrombocytopenic. And then we say end if. So this is the basic structure of your if-then statement. You start with the word if, you put a condition that will be evaluated, in our case platelet count less than 70, and then you say what happens then. If condition then, you say what happens, and then you close it out with an end if. Notice how I indented here from the if. This is a nice way to structure your program so you can see where your if starts and where it ends, and everything in between is part of your if condition. Now, having said that, let's now write the output to Excel. So I'll delete these values here. I'll enter a value of, say, 50. I'll come back and I'll run my code. And as you can see, it prints a status of thrombocytopenic. So that's your basic if-then statement. It checks the condition, and if the condition is true, it prints the report. However, there is a slight problem with this. Let's see what happens if we enter a value that's greater than 70. Let's put 100, and let's run the code. As you can see, now we have a blank status. So the if-then statement works if the condition is true, but we have no output if the condition is false. Let's see how to fix this. Let's take a look at the if-then-else statement. Let's copy the code that we have in our if-then statements and paste it into our if-then-else. And let's make a slight change. Here we have the if statement, the condition and the then, and we have the condition that runs if the statement is true. What we can do is we can put an else clause into our if-then statement, and then do something different if the condition is not met. So this is our if-then-else statement. We have an if with a condition, and something to do if that condition is true. If the condition is false, we do something different. Let's run the code and see what we get. As before, we'll start with a count of 50, and we'll run the code, and we get thrombocytopenic. Now if we change the count to 100, and run the code again, this time we get normal. Let's put breakpoints in there and see what happens. If we run the code again, it runs up until this point. Let's put our variable platelet count into the immediate window, puts question mark in front of it and hit return, and we can see that we have a value of 100. So our condition of platelet count less than 70 is not met. As we step through the code, we can see that it jumps over the statement to run if the condition is true, and it runs the portion of the if-then-else statement for when the condition is false, and writes our statement out to Excel. Next, we'll take a look at the immediate if statement. The immediate if statement looks like an if-then-else statement, except it runs all on one line. So let's copy this code, paste it into our immediate if block, and let's make a change to the if-then-else. With immediate if, we need our report to be equal to IIF, or immediate if, and then we state what the condition is. So our condition is the same, platelet count less than 70. We put a comma, and now we put what to do if the statement is true. In this case, we say thrombocytopenic, and then we state what to put if the condition is false. So report will check the condition, and if the condition is true, it will report thrombocytopenic, and if it's false, it will report normal. Let's run the code and see what we get. So with 50, it's thrombocytopenic, and with 100, it is normal. Next, let's take a look at the nested if statement. I will copy our code from the if-then-else statement and paste it into the nested if, and then we'll take a look. Now, when the platelet count is less than 70, it's thrombocytopenic. But we know that if the platelet count drops below 10, then the patient is in real danger of intracranial hemorrhage. So rather than just looking at platelet count below 70, we might want to do something else. Let's do this. Let's comment out this line. And let's nest another if-then-else statement inside the first if-then-else statement. So now I'm going to say if platelet count is less than 10, then I want to put in the true condition, and I want to have an else statement there, and I want to have an end if. So what I want to do if it's less than 10, I want to report risk of risk of intracranial hemorrhage. However, if it's not less than 10, then I want to report thrombocytopenic. Okay, so I have my outer if-then-else statement. If the condition is true, I want to run another if-then-else statement. So first I check if it's less than 70. If it's less than 70 and less than 10, then this side of the statement would run. But if it's less than 70 but more than 10, greater than or equal to 10, then this statement will run. Let's put a breakpoint and see that in action. So I'll run the code. We're checking our condition. Our condition is that platelet count less than 70. It's currently 50. So if I step through it, I expect it to run this part, the true part of the statement, and not this, the false. But now we're checking a second condition. Is it less than 10? It's not less than 10, so it doesn't run this part, but it is, but it should run this part of the statement. And sure enough, we have a report of thrombocytopenic, and then we write that to Excel. Let's see what would happen if the platelet count were to be 5, for instance. We'll run that again. Platelet count is 5. As we step through it, we're checking if it's less than 10. It is, and so we run the true part of being less than 10. We assign the report risk of intracranial hemorrhage, and we write that out to Excel. So sometimes there is value to be had in nesting one if-then-else statement inside another, because if the first condition is met, you might want to run it again with a second condition. Next, we'll take a look at the if-then-else-if statement. If-then-else-if allows us to test multiple conditions one after the other. Let's copy our basic code from our if-then-else statement and modify it to an if-then-else-if statement. What we can do, we can first test if the platelet count is less than a very low number. If it is, we can say report risk of intracranial hemorrhage. Then we can say else if and put another condition. And say then, and then we can report something else. Thrombocytopenic, infusion required. We can have another else if, and the number of else ifs that you can add is almost unlimited. So if it's less than 70, we can leave it as thrombocytopenic, and then we finally have the else part of the statement, which is if it's more than 70, then the platelet count is normal. So what we've done here, we're checking 1, 2, 3 conditions. First, we check if it's less than 5, and then we have one outcome. Then we check if it's less than 20. We have a second outcome. Then we check if it's less than 70, and we have a third outcome. And then all else fails, then we report it as normal. So let's see how that works. I'll put 50. And I'll run the code. What do we expect? We expect it to run this portion of the code. Let's run that and see. And sure enough, it's thrombocytopenic. If we have it as 100, and we run the code, it's normal. And if we have it as 10, when we run the code, transfusion required. And if it's less than 5, when we run the code, risk of intracranial hemorrhage. So our code works very well at the moment, and we're very happy with that. Next, we'll look at the select case statement. The select case statement is really good for when you're testing 3 or more conditions. So let's copy some of this code from our last statement into our select case structure, and let's take a look at what the select case structure looks like. With select case, what you're doing is you're testing a particular case, and the case has to be based on something, and in our case it will be based on platelet count. And then you put some conditions for different cases, and then you end your select. So what are those cases? So we can say the first case is platelet count less than or equal to 5. If the platelet count is less than or equal to 5, we might want to report risk of intracranial hemorrhage. Another case we could test is platelet count less than or equal to 20. If that's the case, then we could say transfusion required. We could test case is less than or equal to 70. In which case it's still thrombocytopenic. And we could say consider transfusion. We could have another case and we could just report that as something to monitor. Finally, we could have less than or equal to 450, in which case we could report it as normal. And that is our select case structure. At the end of all that, we can report that out to Excel. Okay, let's test this and see what it looks like. Let's start off with a case of 50. Let's run our code. And as expected, it's thrombocytopenic, and we're advised to consider transfusion. What happens if it's 10? We run this branch of the code, transfusion required. And if it's 400, and then it's normal. Okay, so that all looks really good, but it's not yet perfect. Let's test a situation, for instance, where the platelet count is 2000. Now, this is clearly an invalid number. But when we run the code, what happens? We get nothing. So what we've left out of our select case is what the default position is if none of these cases happen to be true. So what we're supposed to put in, what we need to put in, is the case else. So if it's case else, then we want to report something like unexpected value. Let's check. Okay, let's run that code again and see what we get. And there we have it. Our code is now valid and checks all of the different conditions we want to check. And if none of those cases are true, then it runs a default value. Next, we'll take a look at the importance of the order in which you check your conditions. So let's go back to our select case. Let's copy that code and put it into our order sub. And let's take a look. As you can see here, we are checking the conditions from lowest platelet count to highest in that order. What happens if we change the order and we check the highest values first? So here I've now changed the code around so that I'm checking the highest values first and then the lowest values last. What do you think would happen if I were to put in a low platelet count? Let's run this code and see. As you can see, it says normal, even though we know 4 is definitely not a normal platelet count. Why is that? It's because our if then else statements and select case will terminate whenever they hit the very first condition that equals true. In this case, 4 is definitely less than or equal to 450. And so our code terminates at this point and the rest of the values are not checked. So it's really important that you order your conditions very carefully so that the most restrictive condition is first and then the least restrictive last. That way you won't run into the sort of problem we have in here where 4 is true for the very first condition, even though that's not what we want to happen. We want it to be when it's less than or equal to 5. So with that, we complete our review of this really powerful technique in Excel VBA programming, being able to branch to different parts of your code based on a condition. We've looked at the if-then statement, the if-then-else statement, the immediate if statement, nested ifs, and select case. And we've also looked at the importance of order. Now, with all this, you can make use of your Boolean logic as well to set up really complex conditions that you check at different stages and then run different branches of your code based on those conditions. I'm sure you will find this very useful in your Excel programming journey. I'll see you in the next video.